he has his drum sounds and all his stuff dialed. So it was like better than going to a studio because we had our own really comfortable setups, you know, and I could sit in my pajamas and do the vocals, like, you know, and
yeah, so this is about you and your kind of origin story in music, and we'll talk about the new record that comes out tomorrow.
Great.
Sweet. I know what's funny is I just interviewed, do you know who Brad Barr is?
Yeah, he's a good friend. Yeah.
I was gonna say I thought so because we were talking and I asked him. He's got a new record out. It's like all guitar driven, just him on guitar, really. And I was asking him, you know, kind of what the milestones were in his career with the Slip, and he was like, playing New York City with Lettuce. That was like the first thing he said. I was like, that's so funny.
Nice.
So
yeah, I've known Brad since we were like 13 years old, I think.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, okay. I met it, or maybe 14. It was at this thing called National Guitar Summer Workshop. It was like guitar camp is what we called it. And he was one of the first like really young guitar players that I met that were, and also his brother came up and like jammed with us. I was like totally amazed by them, like the brother duo. And got to play with them a lot over the years, you know, in various formations. And I love his guitar music too. His first guitar record he made like whatever 15 years ago or something. It got stuck in my old car. It was the only, but I was like happy about it. It was like I used to listen to it constantly.
That's so funny.
Yeah, but I love Brad. What a great guy. And actually, when they did like a reunion, the Slip reunion show a year or two, like right before the pandemic, I think, I sat in with them up in San Francisco.
Oh, you did? That's so awesome. Yeah, it was, you just kind of mentioned, he's like, oh, Lettuce, blah, blah, blah. And then I didn't put it all together until like an hour ago. I'm like, wait a minute, I should have brought this up.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd bring it up with
Brad.
You. Yeah, I just assumed that you guys met because you went to Berkeley, right?
Yeah. Okay. Although I don't know if we went there at the same time, but we were friends even way before that.
Yeah. Wow.
But then there was so many different kind of intertwining connections with him. So like we met early on, but then just stayed friends, you know, over the years from so many different connections throughout the years. But yeah.
That's amazing. Well, real quick, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Florida, but I didn't live there at all. But I grew up like in Connecticut till I was about 13. And then I moved around a lot. I went to high school in Vermont, in Putney, Vermont. I went to like in kind of a pretty alternative artsy school. And then I spent some time in Boston at Berkeley, and then I transferred to Hampshire College in Massachusetts. So I would, it's easiest just to say the Northeast. I lived in Boston for a while, and then pretty much my whole adult life in New York City. I moved there in the end of '99 and was there till 2019. So 20 years. And then I moved to LA. So I've been in LA since 2019.
Oh my. Okay. Wow. Well, knowing that you met Brad at 13 at this guitar camp, I'm assuming you obviously knew guitar at that point, but what was the first instrument you learned how to play, and how old were you?
It was actually bass was the first instrument. Like my dad got me a bass for Christmas, either 12 or 13. I know. So when I went to that guitar camp, I could barely play. My brother I had an older brother who was a musician, guitarist, and piano player, and still is. But at that time, and he had bands at that time, that was like partly why I wanted to play. I wanted to like hang with my older brother's friends, and they were jamming in the basement, and I wanted to be included, you know. And he went to this guitar camp, and my dad kind of just like was like, well, they let you go too. He was like, I need some time off here. You know?
Right. I'll get both kids out of the house this way.
Also, my parents were divorced. So like my dad was kind of single dadding at the time. Which now I totally understand it in a whole different light. But I was just learning a few chords at the time, but that summer and being around Brad and a lot of these other guitarists that were way ahead of me was so good for me, because it just kind of like thrust me into it. So that was a really important time for me, because like I went from like a few cowboy chords to like actually learning my way around the instrument.
Wow. And from there, like getting out of that summer at this guitar camp, did you go home and now you got some knowledge under your belt? Like, are you starting a band at this point? Or are you still noodling
Yeah.
around at home?
I mean, I was trying to start bands for a very long time. And really, and then I went away to school in Vermont, and I was practicing a lot, playing mostly by myself. And then I went to the summer program at Berkeley,
Oh,
which
okay.
was when I was 15 going on 16. I turned 16 that summer, I think. And that's where I met Adam Deitch and Adam Smirnoff, all the Lettuce guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge turning point for me to see other guys my age that were like as passionate about music and that were just like so advanced. I mean, I was learning so much from being around them, but it was inspiring to like see other guys, because in my hometown or even at my school, like there was other musicians there, but not not guys that were like so obsessed with the way I was. And to
Mm-hmm.
meet these guys, and they were so much further along than me too, and it really kicked me in the butt to like start practicing more. And it also just opened my eyes to so much music that I hadn't necessarily heard. Like, and I was into like funk and jazz and things like that, but hadn't like gone down the rabbit hole. And it was cool because a lot of it, Ryan Zoidis, all the Lettuce guys kind of came together that summer and brought different records to like a collective kind of mind. So I was all into Herbie Hancock and Thrust and that era of Herbie Hancock, but I was also into like psychedelic music, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, and Adam was like Earth, Wind and Fire, and we were all into James Brown. But then Ryan Zoidis brought the Tower of Power,
Mm-hmm.
and so we all had like different things that we would just sit there and listen to music for hours and hours on end and hang out and jam. And there was like a little practice room in the Berkeley dorm there, and we would just spend all night, because like people would sign it out in the daytime, but no one, like after, like we would just go there all night,
Oh, because nobody
and
would
just
take the
play all,
night slots.
there was not, that wasn't even on the sheet, you know what I
Oh.
mean? So we'd get like the last one and like type, then we would just hang in there the whole night.
That's amazing. When you went to the Berkeley, the camp before going there, that
Yeah,
you said that's when you met the guys for
that's when I met
Lettuce?
the guys. That's pretty much the time period that I'm like speaking of.
Oh,
And then
okay.
we all decided that we would go there 2 years later. We were all the same age. I think Adam Smirnoff was like a year older, so he started earlier, but we all were like, okay, we're going to come back and we're going to form a band when we get here
Mm-hmm.
like 2 years later. Of course, then I left after a semester, and then everyone kind of splintered off. But the funny thing is, the greatest thing about Berkeley for me was just the connection. Like to this day, I mean, I only took a handful of classes there,
Mm-hmm.
but it was really about the connections that I got to make there and the people. Like I'm still working with so many of the people that I met in that short time period.
Yeah, that's what's amazing about hearing stories from that school, because once you kind of get your crew of people around you, get your band, and you're going and having some success, it's like, isn't that the whole like end goal of graduating from there anyway?
Yeah, I mean, not that many people graduate. It's kind of rare that people go 4 years there. But it's not necessarily about that. I mean, in music, you know how unless you're setting out to be an educator,
Mhm.
which is also an amazing path. There's no knocking that. But if you're trying to be a performer or a songwriter or whatever you want to, an artist, the people aren't really asking you to show your degree when you get to the studio or whatever.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's really about the connections. And it was a different time period too. Like it's so interesting going back. I've gone back and done some master classes there and stuff.
Mhm.
And when I was there, you had to wait in line and to sign up to get into the studio, and there was like this huge list, and it was prioritized for the recording majors. And because I always wanted to learn about production and recording, that was the thing. And now, like laptops are everywhere, and
Right, that's
recording
it.
devices. There's a million studios, and most people are honestly recording in their rooms or in wherever. So it's a different world there now, and it's exciting, man. I went and did like some really cool stuff there, and all the students are so advanced with their recording and their producing. I did the
Mhm.
same thing at University of Miami, and I was just blown away you know, because we were playing with each other, but we didn't have the ability to like make records in our room. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And then you have all these musicians like living in the same hall, and they're all collaborating and recording and mixing over here and adding this. It's such an interesting evolution, how people are creating music now. It's crazy.
Yeah, like you said, if you have a laptop and like a USB mic, you can kind of put something together.
You can make great records like that now, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's mind blowing, especially with the pandemic happening. Everyone was like, "Okay, I got to go grab a setup or grab a few
Yep.
things and kind of
Yeah.
go that way." So it's
I
yeah.
s- yeah, I certainly changed my whole setup during that time. I mean, the new record that is coming out right now,
Mhm.
was all made during the pandemic. Pretty much, mostly, you know, I worked with Otis McDonald, the producer, and we did it 90% of it remote, where I worked in my studio and he worked in his studio, and we just sent everything back and forth. And then eventually started using this program Pedal, where we would do it simultaneously and be able to see each other and record in both of our environments, which was also cool because, you know, I have all my pedals, my guitars, my preamps, everything how I want it. He has his
Mhm.
drum sounds and all his stuff dialed. So it was like better than going to a studio because we had our own really comfortable setups, you know, and I could sit in my pajamas and do the vocals, like, you know, and so it was actually such a cool way to record, in this weird silver lining, because I wouldn't have done it that way. But we found a really cool rhythm in working, and we're both engineers, so like we didn't need anyone else, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So the two of us made this entire record remotely, and then he mixed it and mastered it, you know, and I could sit here in my studio on my speakers, and while he's mixing and mastering it, and I could see him and move the faders if I wanted to, and be like, hey, what about this, what about, it was incredible, you know,
That is
like
cool.
I could not have imagined making records that way even 10 years ago, but definitely
Mhm.
not 20, you know?
Wow. Yeah, because back then you had to know the big boards and all the big equipment. I mean, you still
Yeah.
probably do if you're recording in like a major studio, but like the fact that you can record a whole record in your house and do it over essentially over a computer like this.
Yeah. And, you know, and a lot of this emulation stuff, like Universal Audio, and they're like doing it so well that, you know, because back in the day, it was hard to access like a Need console or an SSL console. To
Mhm.
actually get time working on them was hard to come by. Now you can have these plugins that are really kind of amazing, and you can sit here and tweak it forever. You know what I mean? At your
Yeah.
house. I think there's good and bad too. I was just talking to someone about that. That like in certain cases, having too many options can have you like scratching your head, and can kind of like keep you from the goal. But I think if you're using it the right way, it's amazing.
I would imagine it could get to the point where you're because you have time right now and especially during the pandemic, you have time. And if you have the plugins and you know what you're doing, you could almost, do you ever find yourself like overproducing or like having to go back and be like, okay, let's just hear this from the beginning and take all these
I
effects off of
have
it.
gone through that. I think what was nice about working with Otis on this record was I it freed me up to just be a little bit more about the performance and less about the technical stuff. And then
Mhm.
when we would start doing the more like minute technical stuff, it was nice to like work with another person, especially someone like him who I love his ears, you know, because
Mhm.
we got through things a little quicker, I think, than like I've done stuff. My last project, I did a prep project called Telescope, and it was just me and another producer. But I would do a lot of tweaking, just sitting here. You know, there was a nice like me, Joe and I, Otis and I would like set up sessions, like go on Pedal at 2 p.m. tomorrow, and we'll like just knock out this mix, you know. And we had a nice flow that kind of like if we spent too much time on one thing, we would like nudge each other. Like, okay, we're good. Let's not go too
Okay.
far. So I think we had a good yes, I've been through that, but I think with this record, also we both were of the mindset like let's get good sounds as we're recording and not rely too much on like plugins after the fact.
Okay.
So we both were like in that mindset. A lot of my guitar sounds that you hear on the record are just what I recorded. I didn't like add a lot of plugins to the guitars. He did some stuff with the mixing and EQs, but it wasn't we both are pretty particular about how our stuff sounds as it's happening. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something that has helped, as the technology's gotten better. Your home recording can sound really good on like the front end,
Mm-hmm.
whereas like in the early days of digital recording, I felt like I had to tweak everything so much to sound warmer, or to sound better. So I think that's like something that I've learned over time too from producing other artists, is like,
Mm-hmm.
make it sound right when you're making it.
Right.
Don't say we'll fix it in the mix, because that never works.
Mm-hmm. And even finding the sound of like
Yeah,
what you want it to sound like on your amp going in,
yeah,
instead of being like, okay, I'm going to record this in, and then we're going to go find the plugin that we want. And then you're probably almost spending more time trying to test and screw around that way than doing exactly what you want to do going in.
yeah, and you'll get lost in it at that point. I mean, the other thing is that getting the right sound as you're creating inspires the performance to be better, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that people think about more so in the live setting, but like it's like, getting it, if my guitar sounds right and my headphones sound right, or in a perfect world I don't even have headphones on,
Mm-hmm.
um I'm going to play so much better, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
sing better,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so.
To rewind here just a little bit, I'm curious, with going to Berkeley, and you said you're out after what, one semester. Was that when Lettuce started to like really kind of take off, or like, or was that the band
No,
that
that
started then,
was
or?
No, we were like playing gigs in like basements and dorms, and occasional like clubs opening for people. But then I went to Hampshire College, because that was my freshman year.
Oh
That
yeah,
I
okay.
was so then I went to Hampshire, and it was only 2 hours away from Boston. So I would book shows for Lettuce out there at Hampshire College. We would play at the college and the local club that way. Which so it was only, and then sometimes in Boston. And then by the end of college, the other guys in the band all got other gigs. Like Ryan was in a band called Rustic Overtones. Adam Deitch started playing drums with Average White Band,
Mm-hmm.
actually, which was crazy because they were our heroes. And
Oh
then,
really? That's
yeah,
amazing.
and then Soulive formed
Uh-huh.
my senior year of college. Um,
Oh.
so then Soulive really is what took off, and we got signed and toured the world and opened for the Stones, and like, I mean, it's a whole crazy, that's a whole story in itself. But then years after that, it was like, hey, let's get Lettuce back together, or really during that, I'd say, was we'd play a gig here, a gig there when I was off the road. And then we'd open for Soulive on certain occasions. And then eventually, I'm fast forward way later. The
Right.
other guys in Lettuce, Deitch had then became the drummer for Schofield, who was a friend of Soulive, and then he ended up sitting with Lettuce, said, I love this drummer. And then our guitarist, Adam Smirnoff, ended up on tour with Robert Randolph. This is in
Oh
like the
wow.
2000s, because we were all friends,
Yeah.
and then around
Robert
2000.
Randolph's rad. I had a chance to chat with him before.
Yeah, I love Rob. Me and Rob. I mean, I played on a lot of his early stuff, and
Yeah, I saw
like,
that. You had some
yeah, and
credits on a
I
lot of those
wrote for
records.
him and wrote songs for him, and um, but when Lettuce around 2012 or 13, the other guys were kind of like, hey, we want to make this our main thing. And at that point, I was doing Soulive, and I was producing a lot more at that time. And then I was also doing stuff with Tedeschi Trucks Band when I wasn't with Soulive. So I kind of bowed out from the touring side, because they were all like, hey, we want to make this like our job and let all of our side man gigs go. So when they made that decision, I was like, hey, I'm not ready to like do 150 shows with Lettuce with all the other things I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I love you, and they were still best friends, but they went on touring without me at that point, and I still play with them on occasion, but I'm not part of the like touring entity anymore.
Got it. Okay. Well, so Soulive started, and that's obviously what really took off. And from
Yeah,
what I've seen is like that the record was just kind of the first one, right? Was that just like out of a jam session?
the first Soulive record.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's an EP called Get Down, which was our first time ever getting together. It was like we actually
okay.
I actually like showed up and they had a recording rig. We were like rehearsing these tunes and we recorded it. And you know, back in those days, it was like, let's make a demo CD, you know, and then that CD kind of became an album. And then we eventually used that. We made another record called Turn It Out, which was an LP.
That's what I was thinking. That was
Turn It Out was a little later.
Okay.
That was maybe like 6 months later. Well, and some of the same songs, I think. Some of the same songs are for sure. And then we got signed to Blue Note shortly after that. And then all the next few albums were with Blue Note Records and Capitol. And then we signed with Concord and did a few like Stax Concord, and we did a couple records there. And then we started our own label.
Wow.
In like the 2008 or 9. And then we put out a handful of records independently after that.
You put a bunch of records out with Soulive, what, like 12 albums or something?
Yeah,
like
I think
that?
it's 12 or 13 maybe.
Yeah. Wow. Well, signing to Blue Note, was that, I mean, obviously a huge moment because they're a part of a major.
Yeah.
What was that like? Like, how did that whole kind of like come together?
It was like, that was like the dream. It was like, that was like the end goal, you know. It was like, if we could get signed to Blue Note, we can kind of, that's it, you know. And at that time there was a lot of cool stuff going on. There was a cool scene with Blue Note, and we did a lot of Blue Note tours, you know, because like Medeski, Martin and Wood was Blue Note, and Schofield was Verve, but I think he had done Blue Note too, and Charlie Hunter and Carl Denson. There was like a whole like scene of people on Blue Note, and we just loved the people there. Like that was a great time period. And Nora Jones had like just signed with them, and she was a friend of ours, and there was just like and there was like money in the record business. You know, that was like the end.
What
of
a
it,
world.
You know? There was like advances, and you sold records, and you actually like made money from records and from touring, you know. And then that drastically changed. But yeah, I mean, for an instrumental band to get support like that, like I think about that nowadays, and it's like, it's so different. And there was a lot of, I don't know if we valued it as much as I would now, you know. Of course, we spent a lot of money to make records, which now I kind of laugh at, like thinking about how much we spent to make the Doing Something album. It was like insane, you know, how we were spending so much on studios and catering.
It was like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Our budgets were so crazy. Now people make records for like one day. What we spent on one day of that record would make like 2 albums now, you know.
That's so wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. But we also sold a lot of records, and you know, we had tour support. I mean, it was crazy. We were going all over the world, and it was a beautiful thing. You know, we had a huge following in Japan as a result, which was just kind of crazy timing. I try to think about that now, because now like you battle it out on the road and slowly try to build your following. First time we ever went to Japan, we were selling thousands of tickets, you know. Which was like, which I don't even know if that could happen again. I mean, for pop artists it's different, but for like a technically like an instrumental funk trio, you know, we kind of like hit at a certain time period, and it was a beautiful thing, you know. We had so much fun, and but it was strange because we would do that and then we'd come back to the States and we'd be playing like, you know, bars, you know, and carrying our own gear again and back in the van, you know. So it was like this weird like dream, you know. We'd come back, we'd be like, wait a second, okay, no, now we're like in New Hampshire at a bar again. But yeah, I mean, we had a very interesting career in that way, because like 2002, for example, we opened for the Rolling Stones, and we would play like these arenas with them one night, and then the next day we'd be at like the Irish pub in, you know, Lexington, you know. And then the next day we'd be like in New York playing our headlining Irving Plaza. We had our like day to day was so unique, because it was like we could be playing a jazz club one day or an arena the next day and a jam band festival the next day. So it was an interesting time for sure.
Yeah. Wow. And then was that like your full gig for a number of years?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you started writing for other people and kind of branching out of that at what point?
Yeah. Well, I guess should say that like at the end, like but right before Soulive formed and Lettuce was like kind of falling apart, that's when I started really kind of focusing on production. And like I kind of
Okay.
like went into a mind frame of like I want to be a producer. I'd always played a little bit of everything, bass, guitar, a little bit of keys. I was an engineer. I knew how to so I was like, oh, maybe this is for me. At the time I lived with a guy named Jeff Basker, who's like a very, very successful producer now. But we had a little studio in our house and we were like doing our little productions and R&B and hip hop. And so it was kind of a parallel existence to Soulive. Like while Soulive was happening, I was also doing that. And like me and Adam Deitch had a production partnership and we're selling beats to people. Like we started like some of the early stuff with Talib Kweli. And we eventually like got to do some G Unit and 50 Cent when he was really popping, and
Yeah.
did records for Exhibit and did a remix for Snoop Dogg. And we were working with Interscope on a lot of stuff. But at that point, they were very different worlds. Like Soulive existed here, and then my producer world. There was no Instagram. You couldn't like look me up and like know that. So a lot of like the producer world, they didn't know I was in a band, you know. So like sometimes there'd be sessions, and I'd have to be like, "Oh, I'm leaving," and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm in a band. We're touring. They're like, "What?" You know. It was like very different worlds, and sometimes they would collide, but it was a different time. I feel like now there's like being diverse, and you because of like with social media you can like see into someone's world, and you can kind of like get it. Back then it was a little different, so it was hard for me to maintain the two,
Right.
but eventually I kind of we slowed down the Soulive like around 2008 maybe. And I started like focusing more on production. And but at that time the record industry started to completely dive. So it was
Right.
like all the like cool placements we got in the early 2000s that like, you know, paid us really well. And I was like, oh man, if I just like keep doing that and really focus on that, I'll be in great shape. But then like 2008, 2009, all the record advances and the labels went away. So that was when it was like, okay, let's form our own label. And I started getting more into songwriting, and then eventually was like, maybe I just need to make my own records. You know what I mean? And do it myself. But during that time, I also started my own label. I signed, I partnered with Sony and with Roundhill Music, started a label, signed the band London Souls, Nigel Hall,
Oh, wow.
put out a solo record, put out a few other projects. So I did my hand at that. But again, the record industry at that time was so hard to navigate. And to run a label was tough. So, you know, all of that to say that like by 2012, I decided to just really, because I had been doing all this writing and producing for different people. And I was like, you know what? I just might as well start singing myself, you know? So I was like,
Oh, so
I was
this is
writing
the
all
first
these
time you
songs.
sang was starting in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a lot of the songs. Like when Soulive had singers, I would write the songs, you know, or I would co-write the songs depending, you know, and lyrically. I mean, musically it was collaborative, but and
Right.
then um like a lot of the Nigel songs on the Nigel's record are songs I demoed myself, but he was such a great singer. I was like, man, you should just sing these. And then when I made my record Blood from a Stone, my initial concept was like I was writing all these songs, but I'd also, you know, maybe I could get all these different singers to be on my record. So like I went in and demoed all the songs, and the guy that I was writing with at the time, Dave Gutter, was like, hey man, you should just sing these. And why are we waiting around for other singers? Just finish this record. Like, and so I did. But then it was like, okay, I got to go out and tour and really learn how to sing, you know, because I'd always just, so then that was a process, you know, and over those next few years, I really like tried to hone it in. And also in that process of like going out and touring as with my band, started figuring out like what I wanted to sing. And, you know, because when you're producing other people, it's like you can kind of go all into all these different worlds. And I love that about producing. But then when you're kind of trying to be an artist, it's a different different thing. You know, you have to
Mhm.
sing the songs every night and you have to like own it. So I think I figured that out over time, or started figuring it out, which kind of evolved into what I'm doing now with the new record, and with my new band.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy process to get here, but I'm thankful for like every piece of it, you know,
Yeah. I mean,
because it's helped inform all that I'm doing now.
yeah, I'm curious to know about the, you know, singing for the, like when you said, okay, I'm just gonna sing the songs now. Were you nervous at all, or worried at all? Like, like you've been in this industry for a long time, you had a lot of cred, and you've done all these things. Like, did you have any nervousness of someone being like, "Oh, what do you sing now?" Like, I mean, was
Oh,
you must have been vulnerable
I
to do
mean,
that.
I was like catatonic. Yeah. I mean, there's just, you can't even describe it. It's, well, the thing was like being in the studio, I was comfortable. It was
Hmm.
really when I had to go out and do it live, I was like, holy shit, do I, like,
Uh-huh.
am I going to really do this? The other thing was in the studio, I was also like just doing it in whatever key felt right on guitar. Cause you know, I didn't know that I was going to be the singer. So like, if you listen to Blood from the Stone, I'm like really stretching outside of my vibe, and like, because I didn't know what my vibe was, you know.
Hmm.
And so I think with this new record, it's like, oh, okay, here's my zone, you know. This is where, well, this is where I can live and like have character that's unique to me, instead of me
Hmm.
trying to do something else.
Hmm.
um so you know, I still love that record because I think there's great songs and I think there's great music. I don't know if the singing performance is where I'd want it to be if I could do it again, but I wouldn't have been there. It wouldn't have, the evolution wouldn't have happened without that record. So,
Sure.
um, but yes, to answer your question, so nervous, and I still am. I'm more confident now. And my band now, everybody sings great, which is such a cool thing. And I've always been really into harmonies, you know,
Hmm.
whether it's like starting out with like vocal harmonies, but also like guitar, like multiple people harmony, not just chords. Like two guitars, when two guitarists harmonize, I love that, because like the different vibratos and the way they blend. Same with, you know, obviously rooted in vocals. You know, like I
Hmm.
grew up around so much like Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Temptations, and
Hmm.
you know, like across the map harmony. So my new band, the Assembly, it's like everybody sings, and it's really a theme to the band, is like just vocals are like everything.
Wow. That's interesting because you said like you didn't even start really singing until 2012, and now it's kind
Yeah,
of the focal point of
yeah,
what
I
you
mean, I
have going
still
on.
play a lot of guitar
Right, yeah.
in the
I
project,
would think.
but so I shouldn't say that it's all singing, but it's you know, that when the singing happens, it's very full, you know. That's what
Okay,
and maybe that is because I'm still like not so as confident as I would be with my own voice, but it's also just because like I have such great singers in my band, I want to hear them sing all the time.
mhm. When did you start working on this record? Was it, I mean, you talked about mixing and doing everything kind of over Zoom, so, or you use pedal, I think is what you said. But
Yeah.
when did this all begin? When the pandemic
um
started, or like where were you
yeah,
when that
so
happened, and how that affect your
yeah.
career, obviously?
Well, basically, when lockdown happened, I started being like, okay, I'm sitting in the studio. Started kind of pulling up some of my old songs that I'd never finished, and started writing down, like, okay, what would I want to do for my next record? I thought about making an acoustic record, um, and you know, was just jotting down ideas. And during that, I basically met Otis McDonald, who's the producer on my record and kind of my co-pilot on the project. And we met on like Instagram through Will Blades, who's now my keyboard player, and there was a few of my friends, Adam Deitch too, who were sending, hey, you got to check this guy out. He's a producer. He makes beats. He
Mhm.
sings. He's plays all these instruments. You guys are like kindred spirits, you know. So initially it was like you guys would just be friends, you know. And
Mhm.
we were instantly. It was like kind of weird because there were so many parallels in our universes, and the biggest one at the moment being that my wife was pregnant with a boy and he had a 1-year-old boy. So like, it was a lot of our conversations were like, okay, you know, about fatherhood and
Right.
studio life and musician life and touring versus studio and, you know, all the things. We had so much in common. And then and also I just loved what he was doing with his production and his video stuff. So I just was asking him a lot of questions. Hey, talk me through this. And he showed me a lot of cool technical stuff. And then in that process, he's like, hey, I'm doing this compilation for a charity. I'd love to work with you on a song. And I was like, oh, great. Any ideas? And he was like, well, we're doing covers mostly, but whatever you want. And had just kind of put down a demo of this Bob Dylan tune, Man in Me. And I sent him like just like a click track with acoustic guitar and a vocal. And he sent me back this like amazing production with drums and keys and background vocals. And it just sounded unbelievable. I was like, you did that with what I sent you? And I was like, this is amazing. Let's finish it. So I added like lead guitar, added some more vocals. We finished it. And then I was like, hey man, what about doing more stuff this way? Like, this is easy. I'm in my studio, you're in yours. Neither of us have shit to do.
Right.
My tours are all canceled. So I sent him, the next song was this song called Silence. And he did this, crushed it with that one. And then we started it evolved, like not just the music, but also the process, you know, of like, how are we going to do this? And first it was like FaceTime, and then it was pedal where I could hear it on my speakers and we could send audio back and forth and we could communicate at the same time. And that we just caught this flow that was awesome, you know, and it still sounded really live. You know, it didn't sound like we were sitting on a laptop. And I was like, okay, this is the next album. You know, it was originally like, oh, let's do a couple tracks. And then it was like, no, this is an album. So from there, you know, also he introduced me to Curtis Kelly, who's a drummer and producer that lives here, who was kind of like his protege of sorts. And then I've been working with an artist that I've been producing and working with, James the Eighth. And they're both like in their 20s and like just amazing people and great musicians. And then Will, the keyboard player, was kind of the connection between us two. So when we started like theorizing about how to play it live, the band was just like obvious. You know, it was like, oh, well, Curtis lives down the street from me and you got to link with him. He loves Soulive, you know, he loves your stuff. He's a great singer. And James, I knew James, but James and Curtis didn't know each other, which is funny because now they're best friends and make music together like every day.
That's amazing.
So like our little crew came together in this really cool, like natural way. And I just decided to call it the Assembly. Our first gig ever was playing Red Rocks, which was like an amazing opportunity. My friends, the Motet, were like headlining Red Rocks. They're like, hey man, come out and support with the new band. And so we got to do like a 75-minute set at a sold out Red Rock for our first gig, which was epic. It's on YouTube. You can check it out.
Look it up. That's insane.
Yeah, so that was like how we kicked it off. And then you know, the album now is finally coming out and we're like hitting the road hard. We have a full US tour. It starts in February.
Yeah, it's coming up in a couple of weeks, it looks
like.
Yeah,
a couple of weeks is our first leg of the tour. We start out in Colorado, we do all of California, and then the East Coast tour is like May. We start out in New Orleans during Jazz Fest and work our way up to New York City and Maine and Vermont. So yeah, we're like, and also we're co-headlining with Son Little, who's like a really great artist and friend of mine. So it's going to be a really fun few months. You know, it's a crazy time to be touring,
right?
But it was one of those things where, you know, I just don't know what, you know, the album's coming out. We just like got to push through and do it, and we're going to do it as safe as we can, and hopefully people won't be like scared to come out and buy tickets and all that.
I mean, there's so many huge shows happening. Like, I mean, big tours. I think people are, I mean, hopefully more apt to like go out and do stuff now. I would hope.
Yeah, I really, I hope so. We're excited to get out and play. I know that.
Yeah. I mean, aside from that Red Rock show, have you done any sort of touring at all since the pandemic?
I wouldn't call it touring, but we did like a festival called Halloween that's out in Florida. And then what else did we do? I feel like we've done like 2 or 3 festivals. And then we did like 1 club gig in Denver, like the night after Red Rocks.
Mhm.
And then I've been doing some various other things. I have like an organ trio thing that I did at the Blue Note with Eric Calvin, Eric Finland. And then I also am musical director for like a few events that we do every year. I just did this one in New Orleans called The Tipping Point that it's a yearly fundraiser for Tulane. So like I basically
cool.
put the band together, and then we book the artists. We have like Trombone Shorty
Oh, wow.
And Jackie Green and Marcus King and a bunch of great artists do that with us every year. And then I'm a part of the Love Rocks band, which is a similar type of event, happens at Beacon Theater every year. And you know, we've had like Robert Plant and Keith Richards and Nora Jones and all these great artists join us.
Wow.
And the house band is like epic. It's Steve Gadd, Will Lee, Sean Pelton, Paul Schaefer. So I get to play. Those are like my really fun big shows that I get to do every year.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm not like, you know, trudging it out on the road, you know, with my
Sure.
band. You know?
Yeah. Are you still producing for other people and writing for
Yeah,
other
I'm
people?
still doing a lot of production. It's been a little different with the pandemic in terms of like who and how and all that, but I produced a few things for an artist named Andy Frasco,
Mm-hmm.
who's like blowing up right now, and he's just like such a great guy. I produced some songs for Mark Broussard's new project that's like just coming out. Trying to think, I'm producing James's record, which is not out, but we're putting a single out soon. But yeah, I'm honestly mostly focusing on my stuff. And then I also started a podcast of my own
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that.
during the pandemic. So that like was another thing that I spent a lot of time on during lockdown, and was just like a concept I'd wanted to develop for a long time. I used to have a radio show like every once in a while on Sirius XM.
Oh, really?
And
I've come from
yeah.
radio. That's how I got
Oh,
to
okay.
doing
So
this too. Yeah, I was
So
radio for a long, long time.
the thing with XM was that I would come on, and it was mainly for playing music, and like I would curate playlists, and then I would
Mm-hmm.
do interviews, but it wasn't a talk radio format. So it was like my interviews, we'd like get like how I'm rambling right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'd get the artists just talking, and then we'd have to slice it down to these tiny little things. So
Yeah,
I
like
always I
a
always
minute
loved.
or two, like these little
Yeah,
digestible
yeah, it was like
pieces.
90 seconds.
It
Yeah.
sucks.
And
I remember doing
I
that.
had like Derek Trucks call in, and Pretty Lights and Warren Haynes and Rob Randall. I had all these cool guests, but like it wasn't satisfying to have like 90 seconds at a time.
Right.
So anyway, I always was like, and then like at that time, podcasts were like just kind of becoming a thing,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my world. And then so initially the concept was like I was going to do like a show that was filmed, and the first few that I did was right before the pandemic, and I had Marcus King, Sun Little, a guy named Mac Ayers, and we filmed it,
Mm-hmm.
did perform together, and then
Oh,
talked, you
cool.
know. But
Yeah.
that format, once the pandemic hit, it was like, oh well, people can't really come to your house and can't
Right.
travel.
Yep.
So at first I was like, oh well, that sucks. But then I was like, well, there's this thing called Zoom, which was like new at the time. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, well, what if I, and then it dawned on me, wow, the wish list of artists that I had created in my mind were all sitting at home. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like none of them were touring. So like the first like 5 or 6 episodes, I got like Dave Matthews, John Mayer, Questlove, and all
That's
these
so
great people
crazy.
that I'm friends with, but
Mm-hmm.
would have been hard to get to
Yeah.
do
Any other
something like
time.
that at another
Right.
time. So I kind of just ran with it from there. And then as time went on, I just like kind of just called all of my music friends and said, hey, you want to do this? Let's talk about, you know, and then now all of a sudden it's like publicists and managers are like hitting us up to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
it became a whole other beast. But it's really was just something for fun. That's all it ever was intended for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of taking a break from it right now because I'm going on tour, but we're gonna do
Uh-huh.
season 2. Like season 1, it was funny because I didn't even know what I was doing. We did 77 episodes because I just kept going and going and going, and then I was like,
Yeah.
wait, I need a break. So season 2 won't be 77 episodes.
Okay.
But there's a break happening. I'm actually going to do an episode that's kind of with my producer Otis McDonald that'll be
Uh-huh.
based on the album and also on his project.
That's
But
awesome.
so we're doing that, but other than that, we're going to take a little break, and I'm going to like reconvene probably like spring or summer, and do some more episodes.
That's cool. Yeah, that's funny to hearing your story about podcasting, because that's kind of similar to how mine ended up overtaking, because I did, like I said, I did radio for 15 years. I was on stations in San Francisco and San Diego,
Oh,
and
cool.
I actually we started this at the end of 2018, and podcasting was kind of a thing, and they were kind of talking about it, and I pitched an idea to my program director, and he kind of told me like, that's too, like, he basically told me like, no, that's not,
Yeah.
that idea makes too much sense for the radio station, so we're not going to do it. I was like,
Right.
oh, okay.
Right.
Well, I want it then. Can you sign this piece of paper saying I own it? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then the pandemic happens, and like no one's driving around their cars, and the radio
Yeah.
stations are tanking because no one's putting money into the advertising. And I'm just getting
Right.
all these people that are sitting around, like you just said, are willing to
Yeah.
talk to me. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to do this instead. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. I mean, and I love it. I mean, and now I'm now on the other side doing a lot of podcasts like this week and doing stuff for the record. And it's
Hmm.
I you know, I enjoy talking about music. I would do this regardless, you know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right.
I appreciate, I love podcast format, and I listen to tons of podcasts. That's
Oh,
like,
cool.
it's like kind of how I got into the idea. Was I think I discovered like the Mark Maron podcast, which had been
Hmm.
going on for years before I even found it. And then so like I was just going back to a lot of old episodes and checking
Yeah, a
out a
lot of
lot of
the
different.
comedians kind of started it early,
Right.
early, early on, and then it kind of
Right.
evolved at that point. But yeah, the for early ones I listened to, yeah, were all comedian based, right? Like,
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
Mark Maron, or trying to think of some other ones, but like, yeah, it was mainly just comedians that were doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's awesome, and I wanted to talk to you about that podcast. I think that's so rad. I was looking at some of the episodes that you did early on, and that's cool that you can continue with that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like it got a little overwhelming for a minute, and then I was like, because it was like, okay, I got to do this every week. But now I'm kind of just doing it as it comes, and we'll release it a little bit later.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, it was great because it was just like a chance to like catch up with friends, because it was like a reason to like talk to a bunch of friends and stuff, because at that time we were all locked in our houses, and it was like and also I got to a lot. I had known a lot of these artists, but not necessarily been able to, or had the forum to be like, okay, tell me about like your first guitar or this or that,
Hmm.
or working with Miles Davis, like John Scofield. I got to ask him all the like fanboy questions that I
Right,
was like
right.
too nervous to ask, when we were like
Just
working
hanging
together.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to like nerd out and be a fanboy, because that's really, every musician is a super fan. That's like
Hmm.
why we get into it.
Hmm.
So if you get to talk to your heroes, I mean, that's the beautiful thing.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Are you bringing your 1-year-old on the road with you, or too early?
He has come out for some stuff. Like he came out to, actually he was at the Red Rocks show, and
Wow.
he came out to the gig in Florida when we played the outdoor fest. So he's hung out a little bit, and he came to Hawaii. We just played. I did the gig in Hawaii, and he came and like hung out for a bunch of music there. He loves music. He's like all about it. He
That's
plays his.
cool.
He's got his little drum kit and a piano, and he plays it all day long.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah,
Those are two things that my son was attracted to as well. And during the
nice,
pandemic, I'm like, we're gonna get you an electric drum set so we don't destroy the neighbor's ears. And then we have a
nice.
keyboard that I need to give him lessons on the keyboard. He has a drum teacher now that we're here in Nashville, which is
Oh, cool.
awesome. But haven't
Nice,
found
nice.
a piano teacher willing to take on a 5-year-old yet. So
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be looking into that soon for sure.
yeah. Well, Eric, thank you so much, man, for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. This has been
Absolutely.
awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I have one more quick question. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Um, I think that the combination of like really hard work and real like honesty
Hmm.
is what are like the two most important ingredients, and I also think like um that there's no right way to do it. So like as long as you're working really hard at your craft, try not to compare yourself to anyone else. So I think one of the things that happens in the current landscape with like social media is that comparison can turn people away from being an artist. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this
Hmm.
guy's too good, so good, I'll never be that. But some of my favorite artists aren't like technically necessarily good. They're just true, and real. So I think that in the modern age, it's all about real. It's all about, and people know what's real. So it's I don't. It doesn't need to be polished. It just needs to be great. And in order, and great just means you've put work into it and you've like put your everything into it.
Bringing it back